I suppose I better introduce myself. I'm Darren, 54, married for 28 years to Caroline, 55. When I met Caroline, I was 24, already teaching art at the local high school. No, we're not American. We live on the Yorkshire coast in the north of England. I remember the first time I saw her. She had this short skirt on, and I remember thinking I never realized I was like, man, she had a beautiful pair of legs. And although only a B cup, she had this way of arching her back to look very buxom. She was bubbly and giggly, and I thought that she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She never believed that she was beautiful, though I did, and planned to spend the rest of my life making her feel beautiful. She just couldn't see what I saw. She saw a round, chubby face and a nose that was a little larger than it perhaps should have been. I saw her beautiful blue eyes that turned green when she cried at soppy films. I saw her beautiful smile and cupid bow lips. I saw perfection meet well, and until 6'4" and tower over Kansas Pfeiffer. I have dark hair now streaked with gray-green eyes, and I'm still nice looking. So I'm told Cass doesn't give out a lot of compliments, she reckons. I know I still look good. When we first met, she called me classy. As she said, I looked just like Clark Kent with my dark hair and glasses. It took me a while to convince her to go out with me. I always remind her that I've loved her longer than she has loved me. When we finally did get together, though, it was love. We were engaged after 3 months. Madness. I know. We were married the following year, but I never had those pre-wedding jitters. I simply adored her. Simple as that. She wasn't perfect, but then neither was, as she had a terrible temper and could be selfish. But she was perfect for me. 28 years later, we were celebrating our son Scott's 21st birthday. We struggled a bit to have him. It took us years, and we never managed to have any more. This was something that we still found painful. We couldn't complain, though, as some people are never blessed, and our Scott was a real blessing. He was a son that any man could be proud of. He was the type of child you could also take anywhere. Now, as an adult, he would talk to anyone, make them feel at ease, and had a funny, engaging personality from babies to old folk. Our Scott charmed them all. Scott and I were very close and shared the same sense of humor. He would often say what I was about to say before I had a chance to say too. We spent a lot of time together, and he called me his buddy, as well as his dad. I knew that you have to be your child's parent, not their friend. But I hope I have done both. How would I not want a kid as brilliant as him to be my pal? We might be very similar in personality, but we didn't look alike at all. All fathers want their children to look like them. I think it is some Neanderthal thing. But Scott did. Cass's side of the family had exceptionally strong genes. They all looked alike. Cass and her cousins looked more like siblings. Scott looked like his mom, her dad, and everyone else in her family. When we looked after Cass's sister's children, our nephews, we could never convince strangers that the 3 cousins weren't brothers and that Cass wasn't mom to all 3. We loved those times with the nephews, as it gave us a glimpse into what life might have been like with a larger family. Well, a larger family was not to be. We were very lucky. We had no real money worries. We loved spending time together. Cass and I could never understand those couples who spent their weekends apart. We used to watch our neighbors taking it in turns to go out with friends whilst the other took a turn to look after the children. We loved spending our time together. We were that sort of couple. I still love her as much as I ever had and found her very attractive. She certainly didn't look her age. We both looked like a couple in our 40s rather than 50. This was helped by Cass's hair that still didn't have any gray in it. This was another family trait, as her dad had been just the same. Their hair faded to a softer shade rather than going gray or white. The only blot on our marriage in recent years had been a somewhat dead bedroom. We had always had a very active sex life. Cass had only had one boyfriend before him, and though not a virgin when we met, was quite inexperienced. I, however, had been rather busy at university, and Cass was very receptive and surprised at my sharing of skills. One of my favorite things sexually is to perform oral sex. I love it. It's my kink, I suppose, being a cunning linguist. We never made love without Cass coming on my tongue, ever. I was amazed that she'd never done that with her previous boyfriend. Apparently, he thought it was dirty. I think it's the most wonderful thing a man can do for women, and any man who doesn't is rather questionable. In recent years, since Cass had hit the menopause, she lost all interest in sex. Penetration was painful, and she complained about my girth. I didn't want to hurt her, so I continued to perform oral on her instead. We both enjoyed that, but it was rarely reciprocated. However, soon any sexual contact became a rarity. This upset me greatly and did cause some frustrations in our marriage. I suppose it made me feel less of a man and less attractive to Kes would just display her legendary temper whenever I tried to broach the subject. I found it so difficult because not only did I still find her so attractive, and I had still had a rather teenage libido too. So at 54, I was still taking myself in hand, so to speak, on a daily basis. Apparently, it is essential for a healthy prostate. Anyway, I loved her so much. It was something that I reluctantly learned to live with. It hurt, but I wasn't going to step outside the marriage. Fidelity and trust was all important to me. I had an older colleague once, Trevor. He was in his late 50s at the time and recently divorced. He got very drunk at a staff day when I was nominated to see him home. Home was now a rather bare little flat and over coffee. He told me a story. He was very much in love with his wife, but when he started to suffer from some erectile dysfunction, she decided to fulfill her needs elsewhere. She looked at it as entirely separate from their loving marriage and seemed beyond shocked that Trevor had divorced her. Trevor's ex-wife now lived alone in another flat, still shocked that her lack of loyalty to her husband could result in her new life. The sad thing was a simple change of blood pressure medication later solved all Trevor's problems in that department. Too late for his first marriage, but just in time for his second. That provided him with a very happy retirement. I could never be unfaithful to Kes just to fulfill my sexual needs. My beautiful castle had given me a wonderful son, home, and memories. I owed it to her to deal with this new stage in our lives in a loving way. One of the things that Scott and I shared together was a love of genealogy. We were very excited to find that we were related to royalty. Yes, my 30th great-grandfather was a king. Yes, I know, along with many thousands of others, but still exciting. We ended up with thousands of names on our family tree. Cass wasn't interested. She said it was just a list of dead people. We tried to interest her, but she really wasn't bothered. When I got my DNA kit a few years ago, I offered to get her one, but she had one of her legendary tantrums. She was very much against it, saying they would know all about me. I wasn't quite sure who this big brother like they was and what they intended to do with those information about a rather ordinary secondary school teacher. Anyway, I let it slide. It just became my thing, and it was okay to have a separate interest for once. Update: a few years later, Scott and I still occasionally dipped into the Ancestry website, particularly after an interesting message popped up. Our interest had lessened a little after we realized we weren't going to find any more illustrious relatives. Scott did like to check on my DNA matches from around the world that popped up often as more people joined. I suppose that it was my Irish ancestry that ensured matches across the globe. So many people had scattered after the potato famine, so I decided that as an extra little present for Scott's 21st, I would get an Ancestry DNA testing kit. The fact that it was on special offer probably helped to being a bit busy in the lead up to his birthday. I ordered it a bit late when it eventually came, a few days after his birthday. We quickly completed it and I posted it on my way to school. I didn't mention it to his mom as I knew her feelings on such things. Anyway, it was one of my things with Scott. I certainly didn't want her to start all the big brother type stuff again. Who would be watching Scott now too? I realized that all you people out there have realized long ago what is about to happen next. Looks obvious, doesn't it? And you would be right. All I can say is that it wasn't obvious to me. In fact, when I came home one night a few days later to find my life as I knew it had ended, I couldn't have been more shocked. Kaz was crying on the seat in the conservatory, crying as though her heart was truly broken. My first thought was to wonder who had died. I rushed to her and held her in my arms. She couldn't speak for a while, so I just held her, begging her to tell me what had happened. She eventually managed to stutter that she had been talking out the recycling and seen the cardboard box. The DNA testing kit came. At this point, I started to feel a bit sick. This was a major overreaction, even for Kat. I was starting to panic and I felt like my stomach had hit the floor. I could barely take it in when she said, "Scott's yours, Darren. He is here." His dad. But someone else got me pregnant. I did it for us, I swear. Silence seemed to surround me for a second until I found myself heaving. I rushed to the door of the conservatory and brought up the contents of my lunch. Glover, the steps down into the garden, has actually stroked my back as I was ill, soothing me like she cared. Eventually, I calmed down enough to turn to her and I screamed at her, "For us?" "Yes, to make us a family," she said, quiet. Then the old Cass was back and she shouted back. "It had been so long, Darren." I knew that I couldn't talk calmly to her. I was just too angry, but I just couldn't walk away until I knew more. "You heard what the doctor said, Cass. You heard him say that there was nothing wrong with either of us. No reason why we couldn't have a baby. My swimmers might not have been Olympic standard, but they were perfectly average and capable of getting the job done. There was nothing wrong with you either. I know that one of your ovaries wasn't firing on all cylinders, but the other one was fine. That's why they didn't intervene earlier. We just needed time." I was running out of time, though, Darren. I wasn't all right. I kept thinking about what the doctor said about my ovary. I thought that if I got some stronger sperm, it would counteract my lowered fertility. So Clark Kent's sperm wasn't good enough for you. Then you decided that you needed Superman to do it with his superhuman sperm. So where did you find that? She looked at me, shocked. "Where?" I shouted. "It was Angus," she said quietly. "I don't actually remember leaving the house. I know logically that I had to walk through 2 rooms in the hallway to get out of the house, but I have no memory of it. What I do remember was that if I hadn't left at that point, I was capable of doing something that I might later regret. I brought out of the drive and eventually pulled up on a quiet bit of the promenade out of season. It was almost deserted. Angus, as in my best friend, our best man and the closest thing in the world I had to a brother. She might as well have stabbed me. Angus and I have been friends since we first met age 18 at university. We were both doing art degrees. I took mine into teaching, but he moved into art restoration. Wherever we went to university, people assumed we were brothers rather than roommates. We were the same build and coloring, though my eyes were a paler green than his. He was an inch shorter than me in height. We shared a room, so I also knew that he